Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. What's the scariest thing you've ever seen or heard? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I worked with a kid in New Baltimore, Michigan, about 30 minutes from Detroit. He was a pizza delivery guy. One day he didn't show up to work. His mom came in worried. She didn't know where he was, but his debit card was being used. He had been carjacked picking up a sub for his girlfriend, shot in the head and left in a house they later burned to the ground. The mother effer who killed him did it for gang initiation. His name was Matthew Landry, and I still think about him all the time. Watching the entire back of an underground mine fail in front of you with men under it. Buddy was running a scoop tram in a mine in BC when the shortcrete and rock bolts all sort of fell off the back of the drift, bringing with it most of the rock above. Dude lived because the cab was reinforced, but it could have been so much worse. That's the moment your blood turns cold, because there's not a damn thing on earth you can or could have done differently. I also got to witness a buddy almost get killed by a rock burst while underground diamond drilling. The 2.5-inch core drill punched into a steam pocket and shot the drill pipe and rig back about 10 feet in an instant. The drill operator's usually behind a steel plate that acts as a shield. There was a sliver of rock 4 inches long stuck halfway through it. My point being, underground mining is dangerous as F. When I was in 6th grade, I read a lot of fan fiction. I was up reading at like 3 a.m. and I felt someone staring at me. I looked up and saw a dull white figure standing in my doorway. I was tired and kind of chuckled and said, "Oh no, a ghost." But when I said that, it moved and sprinted down the hallway. My brain immediately went into panic mode and I had an anxiety attack. It walked by the doorway once or twice, but I was too scared to get up and look. I shined my light at the doorway a few times, but it was never there. I haven't felt that amount of fear in years, and I believe I never will. My best friend called me at 3 a.m. He said, "Goodbye. Honestly, you were my only reason, but sometimes it just hurts too much." I immediately called the cops and drove to his house. We found him in his closet. Unfortunately, he had passed away. I was only 16, but we knew each other for years. It was just me and him against the world. We would get bullied a lot, but we had each other. I miss him every day, even 3 years later. So this happened a long time ago, like seriously. The only way I remember this is because of the near-death experience. So when I was little, I was home alone. My parents had a pet dog. I was instructed to go to sleep at 8, I think. So I fell asleep for a few hours. My parents had gone to a concert, so they were gone past 1 a.m. So I'm suddenly woken up at around 11 by my dog barking. I go downstairs, and he's sitting by the door. I tell him to come with me, and he keeps sitting and barking by the door. I looked out the windows, but nothing was there. Then my dog stopped and went upstairs with me. I locked my door with my dog in my room and went back to sleep. I woke up around midnight to police sirens and police breaking my bedroom door down. My parents had got home early due to wanting to get home before traffic, and had discovered that a friend of my dad had broken into my house through the roof and was planning to kidnap me and hold me for ransom. Whoa. If my parents hadn't gotten home early, I probably would have been kidnapped. My dog could have died, and I could have been killed. So thank you, post-concert traffic. Again, I'm no one to judge, just more curious than anything. How old was this person? I understand leaving your kid home alone for a little bit, but this almost seems excessive, and if you're going to bed at 8, sounds like you're pretty young. I grew up in a rural area and would occasionally hear bobcats howl at night. Sometimes it sounds like the howling of a large cat that's in heat, but sometimes it can sound like a human baby screaming at the same time that a large cat is growl screaming. It's unsettling enough that even though I've heard it a number of times, it still gives me goosebumps and makes my heart race for the first few seconds. This probably isn't too bad compared to others, but I went downstairs at 12 to get some cheese and saw someone shine a light into my family's kitchen. Whoa. I teleported out of that bitch in half a second. I told my parents, and they called 911. Once, I was back home over some break in college. My family was driving me crazy. You all know how it is once you move out and then come back home. So I decided I was going to go for a run at the trail around this huge city park right by my house. It's just a 5K, very close to my house, and I used to have to run it all the time for soccer in high school. So I felt really comfortable going there even though it was late, just after 10 p.m. I just wanted to get out of the house. It's late and it's cold, so the trail around in the park are pretty dead. I see a couple who look like Olympic runner types, and that made sense that they'd be out exercising. I'm almost finished. The track is a circle, and I'm almost back at the part near where I parked my car, and I see the first other person I've seen since the really fit couple. She's coming from the other direction. She's jogging, but she's doing it backwards, so I can see her, but her back is facing me. As we get closer, I start seeing that it's super awkward. Her gait is almost cerebral palsy-esque, that's rude, and as you might imagine, running backwards on a curved track is kind of a bad idea. So her head is turned kind of far to the side so she can jog backwards and stay on the trail and not hit the fence. It got weirder though. She's not in running clothes at all. She's in jeans, ballet flats, and a short sleeve polo shirt. Her hair is down and basically all in her face. It's giving the heebie-jeebies, and I don't really know why. Like, sure, that's not normal running attire, but it's just clothes. We're getting closer and closer to where we're going to be shoulder to shoulder for a second, going separate ways, and if I were a dog, the hackles at the back of my neck would have been huge. My mental state, this is weird but not a big deal, has never been so divorced from my physical state. Shaky, panic attack breaths, hair on the back of my neck up, adrenaline making my veins feel weird, etc. in my life. Before this, I didn't really understand the whole my body was mutinying against my brain thing that people say. Everything except my brain was telling me to turn around rather than cross ways next to this girl, but that would have meant running almost the entire track again to get to my car, and F that, lol. Anyway, it's late. I'm like 10 steps away from being shoulder to shoulder with this girl, and keep in mind, she still has on her back to me. I was planning on doing that awkward grin you do when you pass someone on a smallish part of the track, but it comes, and we're right next to each other, and I can't look at her, and I don't. It's been like 20 steps, and it hits me that if she's still running backwards, that now she's staring at the back of my head, and I don't effing like it at all. I get these instant intrusive thoughts of her finishing, winding up backwards, and just flinging forward at the back of my head, and immediately I stop running. Like runner running, and start effing sprinting to my car. I get in and lock it, but for some reason I just can't bring myself to start it. I just keep scanning around for her, feeling frozen. Finally, whatever adrenaline issue I was having wore off, and I made the short drive to my house. Barely remember it. I couldn't stop thinking about the freaky girl. Absolutely nothing happening, and it's still the most freaked out and spooked I've ever been in my life. That's what I get for trying to exercise my frustration away instead of drinking like a normal person. Back when I lived in rural Mississippi, my dog goes nuts barking at the front door. She was old, cranky mutt who rarely made a noise. There was a prowler outside the house. Seeing that person outside the house was heart-stopping. It took 45 minutes for the cops to come, and by the time the guy was long gone, my landlord showed me later that week that someone had tried to pry open the laundry room door. Creepy. When I was younger, I don't remember how old, but early elementary school, I remember that I had just had a strong gut feeling to wake up and sit up, so I did. I looked out my bedroom door, and one of my mom's friends was in my doorway. He took a step or two and immediately lost balance and tried to grab my dresser, not fall. He ended up dragging my dresser with him, and it destroyed my room. I went into autopilot and just got out of my room and went to my mom. My mom heard the crash and found him in my room and beat the shit out of him. He then ran away without shoes. I told her the story, and we found out 3 to 5 days later that he overdosed. We don't know if it was on purpose or not, but he was gone. Still haunts me to this day. I had insomnia for a long time, still do to a degree. I used to go days upon days without finding a way to sleep. After a few, I would hallucinate, vivid and clear illusions which I could only recognize because I knew they weren't real. My senses would betray me, but my common sense would not. Most of what I saw was standard stuff. Bugs in my food, shadow people in the dark corners of the room, movement in the corners of my eyes. But one time, I didn't sleep for around 10 days. I might have caught a micro nap or something, but I didn't get any real sleep for well over a week, and I was falling apart. I decided to try to burn some excess energy with a run. What energy? There was a path near my house. I started running around maybe noon, I think. It started off as normal, as the desperate runs did. I was seeing things, shapes of people and trees, still and steady as they ever were, that tirelessly energy carrying me with an unnatural ease along game trail and self-beaten footpaths. I think I was starting to get tired when a sudden movement made me jump. I turned expecting nothing. The movement out of the corner of my eye, nothing more. But there was one of my shadow people walking so purposefully towards me. I knew it wasn't a real person. Real people aren't a shadowy stain across my vision. But then again, my shadow people hallucinations didn't move. This one did. I ran as fast as I could until I got home. I saw countless others along the path. They seemed to notice me passing and then followed, walking so purposefully, but without menace. When I finally reached the clearing to my house, they followed me from the woods. They stopped so many I suspected I was hallucinating from the shadows of the forest, but the angles weren't right. I rushed inside, planning to take a shower and to goddammit sleep, no matter what. You may think the shadows were the worst part. They weren't. I showered. I lived alone at the time, in a house in the middle of the woods near a swamp. I stepped out of the bathroom naked to see the form of a little girl, only not right. She was distorted, her proportions like a rag doll. She stepped towards me, and as light fell right as I saw her face, shriveled like a corpse with two sunken eye sockets with rings upon rings around jet black pits for eyes. She said something I don't remember, and I effing ran. I had dirty gym clothes in the car, and they were all I had for a while. I slept in a coffee shop on campus. I couldn't be alone for days after that. If you hadn't slept for nearly 10 days, all of this is completely feasible and possible. It's amazing you were even standing, let alone jogging. Went night sailing in my new small sailboat. Turned out it was on the night the snakes were swirling, mating. Boat started to take on water. Really thought I was going to die from being bitten to death by hundreds of water moccasins for some time. Fixed the leak, but boat was caught in dead wind spot and started being pulled toward lily pads, snake havens, by water currents. Barely made it home. This episode went on for about 2 hours. My roommate and I were driving back from the studio at roughly 2 a.m. We work in film, so it had been a long day, probably 9 a.m. to 3 a.m. We've got jazz on the radio, and we pull into our neighborhood. There's something on the road. It's about 6 feet long. I slow down. Oh shit, I whisper. What is that? Is it a body? I'll tell you right now, I always expected to keep my cool if I was ever in a situation like this. The feeling of being the person to find a dead body is absolutely chilling. My entire chest felt like it was submerged in ice. What do we do? She asked. I'm going to drive around it. We'll call the cops when we get home, okay? In retrospect, I think we both handled it pretty well. I inched closer and closer, my hand shaking at the wheel. It looks more and more like a young man wearing a gray hoodie laying on his side. Closer, closer. Plastic effing construction tarp. We laughed with a sense of relief I have never felt since. I was shaking for almost 2 hours afterwards. To be honest, the time I actually found a dead body was less frightening than tarp on road. A tornado. I've heard them described as sounding like a swarm of bees or a passing train, but there's really nothing else like it. It's the most terrifying noise I've ever heard, not just because of the velocity of the wind, but also because of the massive drop in air pressure as it passes over you. Equally as scary is the fact that I was standing outside at around midnight when it hit our house, and it was dead silent. No wind, rain, or anything. Just moments before it ripped through our neighborhood. I still am haunted by the lack of sirens as well. This past summer I went to Iraq, my home country, and while I was there, the Islamic month of Muharram passed, a month of mourning for the death of the grandson of the Prophet. Look up Battle of Karbala. On the 10th of Muharram, the grandson of the Prophet was slaughtered in battle, and every 10th of Muharram, tens of millions of people go to the shrine in Imam Hussein in the city of Karbala to commemorate the death of the grandson of the Prophet. I had the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go with 2 of my cousins. I really just wanted to see and experience this pilgrimage and see those millions of people. We left the city of Basra 9 p.m. on the 9th and traveled by car to Karbala, so we could get there early in the morning on the 10th so we can get back home on the night of the 10th. Now, There is a group of Muslims who believe that on that day, 10th Muharram, they must shed their own blood to mourn. They do this by beating a giant knife, like a short sword, on their head. These people assemble in the city of Karbala in the morning of the 10th, 5 a.m., and they would have a large parade or procession all the way into the shrine. They would typically end by the afternoon. Now, for a little bit of description, these people, they were legit hundreds of thousands, would wear all white, symbolizing a coffin, and some of them are beating large bass drums in a heartbeat-like rhythm, and the others would beat their heads with their knives like effing psychos. There was blood everywhere. Since all the streets in a radius of several kilometers were shut down around the shrine, my cousins and I had to walk a long distance to get to the shrine. We left our car at 4:50 a.m., then started walking. We got to the shrine at 8 a.m. We also had to walk the whole way there while trying to not get any blood on ourselves, and I wore open shoes and no socks. I was terrified of stepping on the blood, even though it was unavoidable. Once the streets became covered in blood, I took out a pair of socks I had in my backpack. Luckily, I had several pairs of socks in my backpack, so I kept on changing them and throwing away the used socks. Went through 3 pair that morning. We also had to deal with the smell of blood. The smell was effing gross. Here we were, walking along this white and red mass of people heading in the same directions as we were. The scariest part was yet to come. As we got closer to the shrine, we saw several groups of people who were not using knives. Rather, they were using what looked like medieval morning stars, except on the end, instead of a spiky ball, they had several smaller knife blades attached loosely with a chain. They would then whip this contraption around their shoulder and hit their back with the blades, making noise similar to that of a meat tenderizer combined with the noise of a sword fight. These guys' backs were bare, like I legit saw a guy who had shredded his back so much that his spinal cord was showing. There were ambulance teams everywhere treating people who have fainted from the loss of blood. There were also many kids doing this. I saw a young man, a teenager, faint right in front of me. It made me almost want to barf. I still stay up at night several months later, not being able to sleep, as I would get flashbacks, and I would hear that ever-present and eerie drumbeat and those awful knife blades on chain contraptions smacking and shredding flesh. And don't get me started on the smell. I can still smell the stench of the blood to this day. My sister and I are convinced there was something in our old house. When I was in middle school, I went through a bout of time where I couldn't sleep with the lights off, and then I had to be able to see my bedroom door at all times. I kept waking up in the middle of the night and seeing things moving in my peripheral vision. One night it was really bad. I was so freaked out I was in a cold sweat. When I looked into the dark hallway outside my bedroom door, it looked like something was swirling around in the darkness. I spent the hours reading, but still being aware of things around me. Around 5 a.m., I got really frustrated and tired. I put my books down and flopped down in bed. By flopping down, my blanket fluffed up and blocked my view of the door. I smacked the blanket down, and across the room I saw this figure. It was only for a second, but it's burned into my mind. It was tall, dark brown, skinny and hunched over. I blinked, and it was gone. My sister saw it more than I did, but she recently told me that one night she left her room to get some water. She had to go through my room to get to the hallway, and when she was in my room, she looked over at me and saw the figure standing at the end of my bed, staring at me while I slept. She then decided she didn't need water that badly and went back into her room. My ex put a gun to his head, threatening to kill himself. I fought with him for the gun, but he got away from me and took off in the pitch-black darkness. We were on a rural road. He fired a shot off. I thought he had committed suicide. I wanted to find him to render aid, but I was so terrified I'd see him with his brains blown out that I didn't try to find where he was. He didn't shoot himself. He just fired a shot off. He claims he fired it at the ground. To this day, I don't know if he shot the ground or was shooting at me from a distance, although he's a pretty good shot, so I imagine he wasn't aiming for me, but I'll never know. But that single gunshot was the scariest sound I've ever heard in my entire life. When I was in around 6 or 7, I was bullied by this jerk who we'll call Dave. He bullied me for about 2 years, and I was the type of kid that didn't tell anyone, but one day I was on my way home from Saturday school, and he and one of his friends decided to beat me up in the alleyway, so I told my parents about it and they called the school. Later that day, A rock got thrown through my bedroom window and shatters with glass going everywhere. I screamed and ran into my parents' room and told them. They called the police and went outside to check. My mother looked through the peephole and saw Dave's mom in the window. My mother opens it screaming at her, and I'm shaking down the steps to see if I can hear everything. What I heard, obviously, was just threats, but for a 6 to 7-year-old, it was horrific. Dave's mom was saying about how it's all my fault and that I should rot in hell, and that she will grab a brick and snack it into my mother's head. I panic and run out screaming, "Please don't," and tears going down my face. She looks at me, and my God, I will never forget how she stared at me. My mom tried to send me inside, but Dave's mother made me stay out so she could tell me how much of a failure I was, and kept getting all in my face, but my mom kept pushing her away, leading to a tiny fight that seemed like a massive one for a 6 to 7-year-old, while my dad is trying to break it up. Well, I guess we know where Dave got it from. Terrible display of parenting, in my opinion. I was out surfing one day when the surf was particularly large. Being a headstrong teenager, I thought it would be a good idea to go out and shred. I paddle out and start paddling on this easily 15-foot face monster. I was scared shitless, but the current caught me, so I couldn't pull out. The normal waves at this beach are rarely exceeding 5 feet. My board submarines, I go forward, skip off the face of the wave, and then get pulled over by the falls by the undertow. I was held down on the reef for easily 45 seconds, and it seems like nothing, but when you're being thrashed against a reef at a depth of 15 feet, it feels like 30 minutes. If that still seems easy, hold your breath for 45 seconds and sprint in a straight line while being sprayed with 50-degree water. My leash snapped, so I had to swim hard for the surface. As I swam toward the surface, I heard the voice in my head saying, "You should have said goodbye to everyone, kid." I finally popped up and promptly called it a day. I still have nightmares about it sometimes, and whenever a storm rolls through, I put the board up and sleep in.